So the Freedom 1843, these vines are 182 years old and still producing great wine. That's amazing. This wine I have in front of me is made from the oldest Shiraz vines in Australia and possibly the oldest Shiraz vines in the world. I think the Lindner family, who own Langmeil, say that it is the oldest in Australia, but I don't think they make a claim for the world. There is quite possibly a little pocket of vines nestled somewhere in Europe which is as old or older, we don't really know. But until someone challenges that, we can say that it is the oldest in Australia. This vineyard was planted in 1843, so it is now 182 years old. So that's pretty ancient. If you look at the front label, it says Ancestor Vine. And according to the Barossa Old Vine Charter, and the Barossa a few years ago formulated an Old Vine Charter, which is very interesting. This is an Ancestor Vine, which means that the vine's at least 125 years old. So the Charter basically says that old vines have to be at least 35 years old. Survivor vines have to be at least 75 years old. Centenarian vines have to be at least, obviously, 100 years old. And ancestor vines at least 125 years old. So it's surprising that there are, in fact, quite a lot of ancestor vine vineyards still in the Barossa. It's a wonderful resource of old vines for the great wines of the Barossa. So this wine is from Langmeil. Langmeil owns this vineyard, and Langmeil is named after the little township of Langmeil, which was one of the original settlements in the Barossa after the white settlement happened there. It is just on the outskirts of Tanunda. Langmeil is owned and managed and run these days by Lindner family, and the Lindners have been in the Barossa for 6 generations, so they've got a lot of history. And they're particularly proud keepers of the traditions and the stories and the history of the Barossa. So they're great custodians of this vineyard. They also have lots of other old vineyards as well, but this is the oldest. Why is it called the Freedom 1843 vineyard? That's because the man who planted it was a man called Christian Orecht, and Christian Orecht was a refugee, a religious refugee from Europe, as a lot of the early settlers of the Barossa were. And so he arrived in Australia and he found his freedom here and in the Barossa Valley. And he planted these vines in approximately 1843. They're pretty sure it's 1843, but they're not entirely sure because people didn't keep great records about what they were doing in those days, not like they do today. So the Freedom 1843, these vines are 182 years old and still producing great wine. That's amazing. Why is that so? Probably because they've never been pushed, they've never been over-fertilised or irrigated. They've just been allowed to grow naturally. And when you don't force vines, when you don't push them by over-irrigating or fertilising, they do tend to live a long life. How much longer can this vineyard live and produce great wine? No one knows. But I suspect it'll be a few years yet, and if anybody can look after those vines so that they do continue to produce great wine, it's the Lindner family. So the Lindners are the managers, the owners, the winemakers and everything of this property, and they do a terrific job. So, shall we taste it? I think we'll taste it. What does that 1843 Vineyard Shiraz taste like? Wow. Well, I've had a few of these. In fact, I think I've tasted all of them. You know, they're pretty impressive wines, I've got to say. They have a lot of those wonderful earthy, rocky, stony, ironstone sort of characters that the Barossa is famous for. You do see that stony minerality more in the northern and western Barossa. This is not quite as far up as that. This is Tanunda. So a bit more chocolate perhaps than you might get in the northern Barossa. This is a rich and fleshy, chocolatey nose, plum, fruit cake, those sort of aromas. That is an intense, concentrated, powerful wine that has a lot of muscle, but it's not tannic, so it's hard to drink now. It's very easy to drink now. It's the fleshy smoothness, the richness, the seductive texture that old vines give to a wine is very much apparent here, I think. It just glides across the palate. I could quite happily drink that by itself, but it would be much better with a nice piece of steak or something meaty. It needs protein, that sort of wine. Cheese, yes, it would go well with cheese, especially hard cheeses. Fantastic wine. This is the 22 vintage, by the way, the 2022 vintage of Langmeil, Freedom Vineyard, 1843 Vineyard Shiraz. So what's the right occasion to open a bottle of wine like this? A special occasion. Obviously it's not cheap, it's quite expensive. This is a special occasion wine, and part of what makes it special is not just the greatness of the wine, but the story. All good wines have a story. It is a wine with great history behind it. A bottle of this wine will cost you about $199, which is not cheap. But gosh, when you consider the history, the story, the rarity of this wine, it is actually not much at all, I don't think. Cheers.